Welcome to the Power of One. Today, we're going to have a very serious conversation about sexual abuse and how it can come in different forms and not always look the same. So, I'm going to be speaking with Michelle, who had her own experience. We're going to learn about that, and the purpose of that is to educate other young men and women. Welcome to the show, Michelle.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Michelle, let's start out with your childhood and your family life. Let's talk about mom and dad, siblings. Let's just talk about your childhood.
Well, I always love to open my actual presentation with this because when my parents were 16, my mom gave my dad sex for his 16th birthday, and voila, here I came 9 months later. So my parents were very young. They were both 16 when they got married. They've been married 53 years, though. I'm so excited to report that they've stayed together and still crazy about each other after 53 years. My childhood was pretty normal, other than my parents being incredibly young. So we were poor. There was a lot of poverty there, but there was a lot of family support. My grandfather watched me during the day, my mom's dad, so I didn't have to go to daycare. I was taken care of by my grandpa. And he, I feel like, was an intricate part of my life as far as he really taught me so many lessons about everyone's beautiful and, not being mean to people. He was really strong on that. And I always tell people, they ask when I speak, I never say ever. And they say, how do you do that? Well, when I was 2 years old, he'd record me. He would actually take a little recorder and hold it up to me, and he would say, what's your name? And I'd say, Michelle Lynn Stolas. I have the tapes. How old are you? And on one, I say, I'm 2 years old. And he says, well, what did you have for breakfast today? I mean, what do you talk about when you're 2 years old, right? Other than breakfast. And if I said, he made me start over. He thought I was going to be Miss America. So he would do that to me and record me all the time. I had a really great grandmother on the other side. My dad's mom was awesome. I stayed with her a lot. Very Catholic. I went to Catholic school when I was little. So other than just your normal experiences as a kid and being impoverished, I had a loving home. I really did. My parents loved me. I was a daddy's girl. And really everything was pretty normal as far as I can remember. People have tried to ask me that, and I've delved back in, like, did something happen when I was a kid? And I cannot find anything. I had a normal childhood. When I was 14, my grandpa died. And as I said, he was my hero and my mentor. And I think that was a huge pivotal moment, which will come up here pretty soon, I think.
So at the age of 14, your granddad passed away.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
What else happened in your life at the age of 14?
When I was 14, I was a freshman, and I walked into the school like any other kid. I just wanted all the things normal kids wanted: to go to the prom, have the letter jacket, the class ring I could throw at somebody later after they broke up with me. All of those normal things that kids have. And there was, the boy that everybody liked. And there was a teacher in the hall. He was the most popular teacher in the hall. He was the football coach, health teacher, driver's ed. And he started grooming me. At the time, I didn't understand what grooming was, but he just started to make me feel really special, pay that special attention to me. I hadn't made the cheerleading squad my freshman year of school. So he offered to let me come to his office and be his personal assistant. And back then in the 80s and even into the 90s, they had aides for teachers, like kids would go be aides for teachers. And that was not uncommon then. And that's what he asked me to do. And I spent a lot of time with him, a lot. And that began when I was 14. And I think I had those vulnerabilities because I just lost my mentor, my hero. Looking back now from hindsight, I think he saw those vulnerabilities. I wasn't the most popular kid in the school. My license plates actually said Geek 71. I was a geek. I really was. And I had really short hair. I wasn't in the cool crowd. And I think he picked out those vulnerabilities very quickly, and he made me feel very special, and he became my hero. He filled that role for me of a hero.
So let's talk about this teacher, this cool teacher. Did your relationship with him somehow shift from teacher, student to something else? And if so, when was the first time that happened?
The first thing I remember him saying to me that was over the top, which if you know anything about grooming, grooming is a process where they try to desensitize the child. You know, as I say in my presentation, it starts off very basic. You've got a great smile. You know, that basic stuff that people say to kids that can look like mentoring behaviors. That's why it's very hard for people to pick out in the beginning. But the very first thing I really remember him saying was he came to my locker and he asked me if I was wearing anything under my dress. And I think he was just looking for the response, just seeing what kind of response I would have. He took a great interest in whether I was having sex. Was I on birth control? He just wanted to make sure I was protected. And he always made those conversations seem like he cared, like normal, like he was just trying to look out for my best interest. And those envelopes would get pushed a little bit further. And as I've said, he never treated me like a kid. And I was an only child. I did not say that in the beginning. I did not have any siblings. I was an only child. And because my parents were so young, I was the only grandchild on one side for 12 years. So I was incredibly used to adult conversation. It was what I was used to. And he would engage me like an adult, and it felt like very adult conversation. It never made me feel uncomfortable. He always felt like he was looking out for me. And the first sexual moment I remember was I was standing next to his desk and I was 15, and he reached up my skirt. And looking back, I can remember the look on his face. I can. At the moment, by that time, by that point, I was in love with him. I really was. By that point, the love relationship had developed long before he touched me. I mean, I was fully in love with him before he laid a hand on me. And that allowed him to progress into that sexual relationship with me because it just seemed like the next logical step. I mean, when I have an audience, I ask them this. How many of you have ever watched Days of Our Lives? And people are afraid to raise their hand, but I go, Bo and Hope. I was holding out for a hero. You know, I had learned that sex was the next natural step in a love relationship. Raised Catholic, you save yourself, you give yourself to somebody you love. And that's where I was with him. It felt normal to me. It did not feel scary. It did not feel bad. It did not feel uncomfortable at all. It did not feel like a bad touch. But as I'm coming forward, looking back and thinking about the look on his face and knowing what grooming is, he was testing those waters. He was looking for that response. But I only see that in hindsight, looking back
Mhm,
now.
mhm, mhm. How old? So you were 15. How old was he?
He was 25 years older than me.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
yes.
So
So he was
when did it,
40 at that point.
okay. When did it move forward to him sexually abusing you and you not knowing it was sexual abuse?
Okay. So after that moment where he reached up my skirt, it just progressed very slowly from then. You know, just kissing, hugging, touching, your basic stuff that you would have in a relationship with somebody where you're moving towards sexual contact or making love, as kids would consider it when they're in love with somebody. And when I was 16 years old, he asked me if I wanted to go for a ride on his motorcycle one weekend and had me meet him over at where he lived. And I drove over there. I parked my car at the Kmart in town. He picked me up on his motorcycle and he took me out to a wooded area. Now, in the moment, I did not stop and think about a couple things that occurred. I didn't think about them until I figured out I'd been abused. Like we were driving down a 2-lane highway and he pulled off into this wooded area and there was no road. It was more like of a grassy area. So now looking back, I know he knew to go there. Like he'd been there before, or it was someplace he knew. But he drove me back behind there and started kissing on me, was hugging me from behind, took his pants off. We were on the ground for a few seconds, taught me how to perform oral sex that day. I'd only kissed 3 boys at this point. So did it feel awkward? Well, it would have felt awkward no matter what, you know, even if I'd have been with a boy my age. But did I want to do it? Yes. I loved him. I felt like I needed to do that. And as I've healed, this is going to come out very weird, but as I've healed, I now look back and think, I really didn't want to do that. But it took me healing to realize that that was the manipulation making me think that that's what I needed to do to get him to love me. And I'm very strong about that with people who tell their kids to save themselves. I try to explain to people that your child's body is not a gift to give to someone else. It's their body. And when we teach our kids that, sometimes that puts them in that situation where they think they need to give themselves to receive love. But I didn't look at it like that then. I really just thought that we loved each other and that's the way it was supposed to happen. So that was when I was 16, but he did not have actual sex with me until my 17th birthday. Other things occurred that entire time, on and off, oral sex and that. But when I turned 17, it was on my birthday. He had sex with me for the first time in his office at school. And most sexual contact we had was at the school building. Like I went to his home sometimes on the weekend because his wife golfed, but usually it was before school, during
Okay,
lunch, and after school.
hold on one second. So he was married,
Yes.
but did you know at the time he was, well, I guess you did because you said his
Yep.
wife golfed. So did you
Yep.
know at when during the grooming stage, which you didn't know was the grooming stage, did you know at 14 that he was married?
I don't really remember if I knew that. She did not come and get involved in the school at all that I remember. I don't ever remember meeting her. I don't remember. He was football coach. I don't remember ever seeing her in a game, to be honest with you. So looking back, I cannot answer that question with a yes or no, that I
Okay.
knew that
Okay.
at the time when it first
Okay. But
began.
at 17, you
I
knew.
absolutely, yes, I knew.
Okay. Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. So when she would be away from the home, you would go over there sometimes.
Yes, yes. She golfed on the weekends and she bowled one night a week. So I would go to his house. My friends would actually drop me off to his house, my classmates.
Did
So
your
they were,
classmates know you were in a relationship with him?
yes, my classmates actually kept lookout for us during the day at school. Like they would stand at separate places of the school and keep lookout so we could be together in his office because he had an office down away from everyone else in the old gym. And I would go down there to see him. And like I said, usually in the morning when I got to school and then always at lunch. Sometimes I'd leave class. Like this is in my extended presentation. He would call me out of class to come see him. He'd write me a pass to get back. I actually got a disciplinary referral my senior year for being missing, and I still have it, for being missing from class for 20 minutes. I said I was going to the nurse. They immediately checked to see if I went to the nurse because they all knew what was happening. And did not go to the nurse, but no one came looking for me down there. But when I got back to class 20 minutes later, I got a disciplinary referral for skipping class. And I think how odd that is now that I was disciplined for being missing from class, but a teacher was having sex with me and he never was disciplined for anything.
So, okay. So, how old were you? So, from 14 to what age?
That I was with him,
Mm-hmm.
I was with him till I was 24.
Okay. So we'll pocket that 24 for a minute.
Okay.
Did at any time did you tell anyone that an adult that you were in a relationship with an adult, even though you were still a minor? Did adults know that you were in a relationship with this teacher? And was anything ever done about it?
Well, everyone knew pretty much. I did not see him as an adult and myself as a minor. I saw myself as an adult and I was the age of consent. So I was thinking there was nothing illegal about this. I was also thinking, and he never said he was doing anything illegal. He told me he could lose his job for being unethical because he was married. He said that was part of his contract and he could lose his job. I did not see this as any kind of abuse. I did not see it as any kind of he was doing anything against the law. I truly just saw it as a relationship, a boyfriend girlfriend relationship. And as I said, my friends knew, there were rumors all around the school. I wrote it in my English journal. he had me keep a boyfriend because that helped him cover for himself. And the boyfriend was out of the school. And it was hard for me to tell that at first when I spoke up because I thought people would think, well, what a tramp, right? She's got a boyfriend. But somebody has told me that that shows a true sociopath, right? Because he was calculated enough to know that he needed that cover up. So I kept a boyfriend, and had written in my English journal that I just couldn't take the stress anymore. I was having an affair with a man who was 25 years older than me, and he was married, and just the stress of trying to keep the secret because he was married was just I couldn't do it anymore. I was just struggling mentally. I wrote that in my English journal, and my English teacher wrote on the top of my journal, "See me after class." And I did. I don't recall ever telling her it was him, but she apparently has told me that she went to him and told him to leave me alone. She did not call authorities. I know that my typing teacher caught us having sex at school and reported it to my principal. He didn't make a call to DCFS or the police. That was at the beginning of my senior year. I went to Planned Parenthood for my yearly exam. And while I was there, they asked me how many partners I had, and I panicked because I'm 17, and I said, "Why are you asking me that? Is something wrong?" "Well, no, we just need to know. Just in case you have something wrong, we need to know if we need to contact your partners." And I became hysterical. I mean, I started crying and said, if there's something wrong, I'm having sex with one of my teachers and he'll kill me. The doctor at Planned Parenthood had said to me, "My, the tangled web we weave, it is when we first choose to deceive." That's what she said. She didn't make the call to DCFS or the police. She let me walk out of there. And I was the age of consent, but I didn't know there was a position of authority clause. And she would have known that as the mandated reporter. And she never called. So there was a lot of failures. I've learned that a student teacher took one of my journals from me, and I'd written in there about a sexual encounter we'd just had. And it's been said that the student teacher took that to my principal and told him to do something. Nothing was done. There's so many failures, so many people that knew. Got called into the principal's office one day. I was having a high speed come apart. They sent me to the social worker. I told her, this is what's happening. It's just too much for me to keep up with this, trying to keep the secret because he's married. And my defining day, I do not talk about in my talk yet, but in my defining day, I went to the nurse to ask her for an aspirin, and she asked me if I was crying because I was pregnant. I mean, it's just out of left field. I'm like, why would she ask? I mean, if you asked a kid now if they were pregnant, that would get you in big trouble. And I said, no, I'm not. I just have a headache, and I was crying. I probably had an argument with him. And she said, "Well, is it your feelings for Mr. Smith?" When we cares about someone like that and our feelings aren't reciprocated, it can be painful. And I knew I was in trouble. I mean, I didn't think he was in trouble. I'm thinking I'm in trouble. If the nurse knows and she's asking me that, I'm in trouble. He's going to be mad at me, right? So I leave the nurse's office and I go into the gym, and my classmates are in there, and they came out and told me that there was a rumor going around I was pregnant with Mr. Smith's baby. Hence why the nurse asked me if I was pregnant. So now I know I'm really in trouble. So I go down to my locker, and my locker was right by the teacher's lounge. And I could hear him in there yelling at people. They were arguing, and I heard him say for people to mind their own, effing business. And he came out of the teacher's lounge and said, "Get the hell to my office." And we're in a passing period, so everybody's in the hallway. And they let him take me to his office, and he walked me down there and berated me for several minutes. That was "you wanted this, you asked for this. I thought you were mature enough for this relationship" speech. "Do you want to see me lose my job and be pumping gas for the rest of my life?" And I left his office to go back to class, and I was destroyed in that moment, because the thing he said was, "If you can't keep your mouth shut, I'm going to have to leave you." And he was my first love. And I mean, I'm destroyed. And there was so much trauma in that moment
Mhm.
that it's really still hard for me to talk about. Like, I walked back up the hall and it was empty. The passing period was over, but my guidance counselor was in her doorway. And she came to my locker and she said, "You need to be quiet and quit crying because you're ruining a man's career." And I honestly can't tell you if I walked to my car or if I ran to my car. I really can't piece that time together still. I left the school without permission. I drove to my grandma's, which was 30 minutes away. And I don't know why, because my house was 10 minutes away and no one was home, but my grandma was home. I think now looking back, we had guns at our home. I'm glad I didn't go home. Really. I don't think I'd be here if I went home. I mean, that's how much trauma was in that moment. I don't remember driving to my grandma's. The next thing I remember was being in the shower and scrubbing my skin raw because I wanted him off of me. I wanted them off of me. I wanted all the people's perceptions off of me. And my very Catholic grandma is pounding on the door saying, "Let me in. What's..." And when I walked out and she asked me what was wrong, I was like, "How do I tell my Catholic grandma that her granddaughter is a whore having sex with a married teacher?" So I told her I was sick. I mean, I didn't know what else to say. And my mom had found out I'd left by then, so she's looking for me. And my mom gets on the phone, and you know how moms are. "If you're not sick, you better get back to school." I mean, that's how moms are. So I went back to school and I was in his class. I had to go walk into his class. And I walked up to his desk and he apologized and told me how much he loved me and it was a mistake to say those things and how sorry he was. And I remember in that moment looking at him, and I'm a 17-year-old, and I said, "It's okay. It's okay. It's over. I know you were just upset and, I love you too." And as a 52-year-old woman, a 17-year-old girl should not have had to been an adult in that situation, in many of the situations I was in.
Exactly.
But the life I was living then was, looking back now, I really don't know how I'm alive. I really don't. I really
Yeah.
don't.
Yeah. Now, when did
So
it end?
when I was 24, I left him because I wanted a family. It had
Mhm.
nothing to do with not loving him anymore. In
Mhm.
fact, I will tell you with great certainty that it's one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life, leaving
Mhm.
him. He was all I'd ever known. He was my compass. And I did love him. And I've dealt with that a lot in therapy. Did I love him? Can you love somebody like that? And I did. I was a kid. I loved who was in front of me, if that makes sense.
Right.
Like, my dad has dementia and struggles, and he's not very nice to my mom now, but my mom still remembers who my dad was before. So
Yeah.
my mom
Yeah.
said, "I get it now." I loved who was in front of me. And that's who was in front of me. That was the man he was who I loved. And I just wanted a family, and he was not going to leave his wife and marry me. And I did not want to spend the rest of my life alone. So I left him. And but we stayed in communication. We stayed friends. Like, I lived in my hometown. He was still teaching there. He, my ex-husband ended up coaching football at my school district, and he was the athletic director still. So he dealt with my ex-husband all the time. My stepdaughter was in his driver's ed class. That's how much I didn't understand what happened to me. I let her be in his class. I didn't think there was a problem with it. So I did not see there was a problem with it for a very, very, very long time.
Now, when did you discover there was a problem, and did you report it as an adult?
So I was 44. And what happened was, I was very involved in my community. I was their booster president, PTA secretary, extremely involved. Kids in school, I was the go-to person there. Everybody wanted Mrs. Forbes to help them out. That was my name back then. And we were going to fire a football coach for a DUI. And I am not pro DUI or anything like that, but we'd fired some people, not other people. I'm like, "Dudes, we got to have a policy." I mean, I was just trying to defend the basic. We got to have a policy here, and people make mistakes. So I went up to the board meeting and I was standing outside talking to the people who wanted this coach fired. And one of them had been a secretary when I was in school. And she looked at me and she said, "Well, we don't need his kind around this town. He just needs to go away and get himself right before he can come back and be a part of our community." kind of like you had to do when you were younger. You had to move away from here and get yourself right before you could come back and be a part of our community. And that was the moment.
Mm.
And I can't tell you why. I really can't, because everybody knew about it. Everybody made fun about it. Everybody made fun of it. Everybody talked about it. A football coach at a clinic literally said that he thought my abuser should be in the Hall of Fame at New Berlin for having sex with that hot cheerleader. That's how well it was known. So it wasn't like people didn't know about it and talk about it, but it was that moment that something happened in my brain. And I looked at her and I go, why do I keep getting blamed for this guy having an affair? I mean, I wasn't married. And in that moment, I wasn't even like, this guy abused me. That's not the way it worked. I
Right.
went home and I said to my ex-husband, why do I keep getting blamed? And then the floodgates just opened. And that night I could not stop crying. I could not stop sweating. I could not stop vomiting. Like I vomited all the time. I hear that's called survivor vomit. And my brain became like a movie. I couldn't turn it off. And so I sat down at a computer and wrote my whole story in a private group, which the school's lawyer loves, by the way, because I already wrote everything out. But I I had to do it to stay alive. You know, like it was the only, I didn't know how to ask for help. So I wrote my whole story. And as I would write a memory, I would process that and heal. And I started connecting with other survivors, the Cosby women, the NASCAR victims, just basic survivors everywhere. And once you talk to other survivors, your own story comes out of their mouth. And then that's when you know. That's when you
Mm.
know. I will tell you, though, that until I sat across from him in a deposition, I still wanted to believe I was special.
Mhm.
And I will tell you that the most difficult part of this journey has been dissecting myself in half, because the half of me that loved him for 10 years wants to understand why she can't still love him. And the
Mhm.
half of me that knows that he's a predator has to convince that girl why she can't still love him. And that is one of the hardest things I've ever had to go through in my life, because there were there were beautiful moments that were so believable. And that's what grooming does. It leaves you always wondering, is he really that way? Or am I, you know what I'm saying? Like it leaves you unable to form that. And I never compare trauma, ever. But he was not a stranger that violated me against my will. He was somebody that I loved that was violating me, and I didn't even know it. And now I have to look at that and realize that I allowed somebody to violate me and I didn't even understand it. How do I ever trust myself again? How do I ever trust anybody again? How do I give my heart? How do I willingly give my body without having those internal feelings and not being able to trust myself? It's a different kind of abuse. It's hard to explain to people.
Well, Michelle, I want to thank you so much for opening up. I thank you for your courage. And most importantly, I thank you for the passion that you have to educate others on grooming so that this does not happen to any other child. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining me today. Please understand that grooming and sexual abuse, again, does not come in one form. There has been many times where people wonder, why does it take years for a young lady or a young man to come forward? It's not that easy. And they're suffering with trauma every day. So please do not judge. And most importantly, any adults that are out there, and if you know a child is being sexually abused, it is your duty to make sure that you help that child. We are all mandated reporters, and there's no reason for any child to suffer sexual abuse and an adult know about it. Remember the power of one. It does start with you. Peace and love.